Hey everyone. After reading the four different accounts of Jesus and the calling of the first disciples in the first four Gospels, I've come across some varying differences between them. Can anyone help me out what's going on here? I'm going to start with Matthew and progress my way through Mark, Luke, and then John, and just point out the differences that I have seen there. Starting in Matthew 3, verse 13 through 17, here it talks about John the Baptist baptizing Jesus in the Jordan River. Moving on to Matthew 4, verses 1 through 11, after Jesus is baptized, it says, "Then he goes into the desert for 40 days and is tempted by Satan." Matthew 4:12, Jesus returns and finds out that John, who had baptized him, is in prison. Moves on to Matthew 4:18 through 20. Jesus is now walking by the Sea of Galilee and sees two brothers, Simon, called Peter, and his brother Andrew. They were casting nets fishing, and Jesus tells them to follow him, and he will make them fishers of men. Matthew 4:21 through 22. Then moving on from here, Jesus sees John and James, the sons of Zebedee, preparing nets, and they also came to follow Jesus. Moving on from Matthew, Mark pretty much says the same thing from verses Mark 1:9 through 20. Jesus is baptized in the Jordan, and at once he goes into the desert for 40 days. Comes back, finds out John the Baptist is in prison, walks along the bank of the Sea of Galilee, calls out to Simon and Andrew to follow him, goes a little further, and had John and James, the sons of Zebedee, follow him. Moving on to Luke, things begin to change just a little bit. Luke 3:19 through 20. John the Baptist is thrown into prison. Come to find out, it's for making a comment to King Herod. Luke 3:21 through 22 tells us that Jesus was baptized. While people were being baptized, it said that John was in prison. I'm assuming that John did do the baptizing in this book, but it was referenced to the past before he was thrown into prison. Luke 4:1 to 13, Jesus, being full of the Holy Spirit, returns from the Jordan and is led into the desert for 40 days. Then Jesus performs some healing and casting out of evil spirits. And we pick up the story again back in Luke 4:38 through 39. Jesus goes to Simon's house to heal his mother. Now my question is this Simon Peter? Or the other Simon? Or is it just some random person named Simon? And
when did he come into the picture? Kind of skipped that part. Luke 5:1. Jesus is preaching at the water, Sea of Galilee. Going up through verse 11. This is the famous story where Jesus tells them to cast their nets. Simon complains that they were fishing all night and did not catch anything. They end up casting the nets and they catch fish, so many fish, that the nets are tearing and they have to call for help from other boat. Both boats are full and began sinking. Come to find out, Simon Peter is partners with James and John and Zebedee, and they all begin to follow Jesus after they get to shore, leaving everything behind. There's no mention of Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter, who is alleged to be a fisherman as well, in Matthew and Mark. Plus, Matthew and Mark doesn't mention this whole fishing story. It just has them walking by and he calls out to them. A little bit of contradiction there. If we move on a little further, in Luke 6:14, Andrew is found. He is on a mountain with the other disciples and Jesus. Moving on to John, it gets a lot different. Starting in John 1, chapter 1, verse 29, going on to verse 42, we have John the Baptist sees Jesus and he gives a testimony. It's not too clear. It doesn't actually mention if Jesus is baptized here or not. But it says, the next day, John is with two of his disciples, and they see Jesus. My first question is, what happened to the 40 days going into the desert where Jesus is tempted? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Jesus says, then goes at once and is led into the desert. This says the next day. Not too sure what's going on here. If we move on to verse 37 to 42, John's disciples follow after Jesus. Jesus asks them, what are you doing? They ask to go with him where he is staying, and they spend the day with him. It says Andrew is one of these disciples that followed Jesus. Andrew goes and finds his brother and tells him that he has found the Messiah. Jesus then gives Simon the name Peter. Okay, so this has nothing to do with fishing, no nets of fishing, no Jesus telling them to come and follow him, no boat sinking. Andrew is the only one here. He had to go find his brother who wasn't with him. Then these sons of Zebedee are now MIA. It's a complete way different story than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But it does get better. The fishing story does come along later in John 21, verses 1 through 14. Here we have some of the disciples on the beach at the Sea of Galilee, same place as in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Some of them decide to go fishing. The sons of Zebedee are found here. They catch nothing. Didn't Jesus on the shore tell them to cast on the other side of the boat? They do, and catch 153 to be exact fish. Apparently it was too many fish to haul up into the boat. They head to shore. Makes mention in verse 11 that the nets are not torn. It was pretty explicit about that. And what really sets it off is in verse 14, this is the third appearance Jesus made to the disciples after he had died and resurrected. In the earlier Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the fishing story occurs before he even really begins his ministry, when he's just calling the first disciples. And in John, there is no fishing story when he calls disciples, but the fishing story comes after he's died and resurrected, and this is his third appearance. So, not really sure what's going on here. Just seeing if anyone has any advice. Video responses would be nice, or text comments. I would greatly appreciate it. Hope to hear from y'all soon. Thanks.